Well, hello there, everyone. How are you doing? It is time for me to go live, and I don't need these anymore, so I can take my headphones off. How are you guys doing? Happy Sunday. Gosh, another week gone, another 2020 week behind us as we draw ever closer to the general election and the end of the year. Who knows what all of this is going to hold, but hold on tight. We're all along for the ride. I'm Christy, this is Weekend Winters, and hello to you wherever it is and whenever it is you are. I just realized these are the first words that have come out of my mouth today. Now that I started talking, blah! Of course, it's got like all kinds of, anyway, I'll try not to cough at you. My apologies, everyone. I don't know how long the show is going to go today. I did some gaming last night, stayed up pretty late, pretty tired. And I've also done some pretty long shows in the last couple of weeks. So wanted to just kind of turn the whole left-right thing, continue with that theme a little bit and talk about some problems on the left, maybe. And I don't actually think that the problems on the left are insurmountable. I don't necessarily think they're all that much different. I mean, I think they're probably manifesting in a slightly different way. But as America moves forward and we look at the kind of country we want to be in the future, I think there's definitely my perception of why some people on the far left are very self-sabotaging in terms of their inability to form alliances with people. So, 2020 is really disappointing. I agree. It's been a terrible year, and you just kind of think every year, like, I just wanted this year to get over, and maybe next year won't be so bad. But that's not the way it goes. All right, so before I move on, I think I'm going to have to switch. Yes, I'm going to have to switch screens so that you guys can actually see what I am seeing. Let's look. I think we looked last time Americans economic. I don't know if they view on capitalism maybe. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about this left-right thing. We talked in the last couple of weeks about the fact that left and right are really, they're not great measures. They suffer from vagueness. They suffer from being sensitive to the epoch or the time period in which they are being measured and discussed. So they're not measuring a sort of fixed attitude over time. They are looking at people's interpretation of these concepts through the lens of their own political frameworks and experiences. And so there's a lot to be desired with the concept of left and right. The other part of it is, just because someone is, let's say, anti-capitalist, that doesn't necessarily mean they think that the classical or the sort of stereotypical definition of socialism is the answer. When we construct left-right spectrum that aren't a lot or none, or more or less, when we construct ones that are like, here's one concept on one side, like libertarianism, and here's the other concept, like authoritarianism, are these really appropriate ways of conceptualizing the spectrum? Should we think about more or less libertarian and more or less authoritarian? Should we, as opposed to saying, because so anyway, I think scales are getting better. And the other thing about the left-right spectrum is we kind of measure things. Like we kind of have some consistent things going on in the numbers. And what that consistency shows us, by transcending time and location, geography, is that there is something there. There is some kind of latent, we would call it, a latent phenomenon, which means like a not a direct phenomenon, but there is a way of clustering information or grouping things, or there is an ideological perspective that we can pick up on when we ask left-right questions. So does it kind of measure it? Yeah, it kind of measures it. And so one thing I wanted to take a look at here is one of the criticisms I come under a lot, I guess. Let's talk about me for a little bit. And it's not just me. I see this term being thrown around a lot by people with roses in their Twitter handles, people on, I would say, the far left. So I would say that there's my spectrum for American politics is the far left, then progressives, which I would count more social democrats. And then there is like the center left, which I would say are more, like slightly left-leaning Dems, but maybe a bit more conservative. And then you've got sort of like moderates who are left-leaning. So like 4 different stages, 4 different locations politically. And part of that is a dimension I'm thinking of people who really value economics. My perception is people who see economics as their primary framework tend to be much farther left than people who structure identity politics issues as being their most, if you want to say most important issue, their most important framework of how they analyze the world. Now, I'm not saying that people who are anti-capitalist can't also be in favor of identity politics, but I think there are people who think that the economics are the most important and then other things follow. And whereas I would probably put myself on the other side of the spectrum, I think that politics and the legal structure and the governments are primary, and then economics, social, religious, civil society all follow from whatever those laws are. So that's just my definition, my personal thing. Then the other thing, we're talking about Americans here, left, right, in America, because I'm American. So, because Europe has got its whole other set, and each European country's got its own left-right history. So that's also very different. More Americentric talk. Sorry. So yes, far left progressives. Then you've got sort of like left-leaning centrists, and then center-left. So left-leaning centrists, or like the left-leaning moderates, those are people who are closer to the median voter, shall we say, and then people who are just like tipping, like the independents who tend to vote for the Democrats. or people who very loosely associate, like with the Democratic Party because maybe they don't like parts of the Republican Party, but they're not strong Democratic identifiers. And I think the other thing that, right, so I'm called a neolib or an S-lib all the time, and I don't understand it. I really don't. Like, why? So one is I don't necessarily know that when people use neolib, they tend to use neolib equally at people like me who are social democrats, and over to the Lincoln Project, and then over to Jeff Bezos. So everyone to their right, anyone who doesn't agree with them, is a neolib, and that's just, it's not a good assessment of the left-right spectrum. So many political groupings in Heart of Iron. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you guys can notice any difference whatsoever. I got a little, you can't really see it, and I'll have to turn down a little bit. I'll pull this forward. I've got a little filter thing for my microphone, trying to make a more intimate sound, more like a studio radio thing. I don't know if it's going to work. I had to, it's not a great stand thing, and I realized that my mic stand is actually not ideally built for it. But at the moment, I've got it sort of encased. Maybe it makes no difference. And it looks like my volume is all right as well. I'm just in the yellow, so just checking that. Now I got all like, thinking about my sound. All right. Rewind. Get focused, Christy. Neoliberal. And so I wanted to get an outside take. So this morning, when I was trying to wake up and having some coffee, I went ahead and looked up. Neoliberalism. Because I was thinking maybe there's a definition out there that I'm not getting. Maybe there's a definition that has come into vogue or is being used in a particular way. So I'm just going to adjust my camera a little bit. I don't want too much headroom. I don't want like that. So just want to be kind of a cutoff. Yeah, that looks perfect. But no, it pretty much means everything that I thought it meant. So let's have a quick look at Wiki, because Wiki is a free and very well cleaned up resource. It's got good links, and you can look at some other things too, but it's usually a good place to start. And on big popular topics on which people have opinions and their editors will check. All right, so neoliberalism, or neo-liberalism, is a 20th century resurgence of a 19th century idea associated with economic liberalism and free market capitalism. It is generally associated with the policies of economic liberalization, including privatization, deregulation, globalization, free trade, austerity, and reductions in government spending in order to increase the role of the private sector in the economy and society. I oppose 90% of that. I mean, I think free trade is and globalization, like those are concepts that I think are kind of complicated given the international economic system we live in. And I'm certainly not pro tariffs. I want to see a bunch of protectionist tariffs being thrown up around, economies to protect, whatever, like new workers co-op would be created. I don't think that would be a good idea. But in terms of privatization, I definitely oppose like the privatization of prisons and the privatization of state services, the privatization of education. And so, no. Deregulation. I think that regulated capital is the only way to actually do a proper redistribution of the wealth. I think that the first step before we can get over to discussing worker-owned cooperatives is to actually start that transition by using the power of government through the legislative process, through the legal process, writing laws that mitigate and restructure capitalism. I think a fantastic idea would be a maximum wage. I don't understand, if we're going to have a minimum wage, why don't we have a maximum wage? It would certainly force companies to rethink how they want to pay their top people, because however they pay their top people is going to impact how they pay the rest of their workers. And that's how they should be thinking about it. And there's only really government that can force them to do that, to force them to comply. So let's see. Deregulation, I generally think is a terrible idea. So deregulation is something that came about in the 1970s in America. It was sort of like a reaction against a lot of government attempts to redress social inequities, but they weren't necessarily successful. I don't know a whole lot about it, but there became an association between government and inefficiency and the private sector inefficiency, which is a total lie. The private sector just skims off the efficiency of others, whereas the public sector will put money back into public services or people's pensions or something that will end up helping the greater good, or the public good, I should say. But in the case of deregulation, most of the regulations that I see on, like the EPA, on car safety, and standards, they are there to protect the environment, protect people's lives. So no, I don't favor deregulation. That's not to say that I think the federal government is necessarily the right instrument to solve every problem. I think in a federalist system like the United States, there should be the ability for states to construct things that comply with federal law. So what you need in New York City, what you need in New York State in terms of your rural-urban divide will be different from what you need in Nebraska. So you do need some ability for states to reflect their needs and their structures and their populations. But it doesn't mean that I think there should be any differences between states in terms of what people are entitled to or cost of living things. Globalization. Globalization, I think, is a pretty complicated... it's a process of interaction, integration among people, companies, governments, and worlds. Is free movement around Europe and the free transfer of goods and buying, is that globalization? Because I'm in favor of Schengen. I'm in favor of the ability for people in the UK, or well, not in the UK anymore, but people in Germany, in theory, could go get a job in Spain. Now that's going to have winners and losers. You're going to get brain drain from some areas, and you're going to have, there's always swings and roundabouts. But as a general principle, globalization, I don't know that we can stop it. So the question is, how do we make it not part of the way of shifting the burden of labor to people who are the least able to organize, or have the governments that are least able to make sure that distribution takes place correctly? So, okay. Obviously, Christy's not a neolib. Thanks. And yet I get called one all the time. There was talks of a MAC wage a few years ago, 20 times the lowest wage the company pays. That speaking of which, I was also thinking the other day about the guy who paid his company employees a minimum of $70,000 as his minimum wage. And his company still has mass retention in terms of their employees. A lot of them have paid off their debts, and a lot of them are taking part in pension schemes now, and they've had more kids. The number of people who are actually took time off to have kids went up. So it's not a really crazy idea. If someone feels they have a secure wage, then they are able to actually better participate in the economy. And for all the talk about, lower birth rates, the way to do that isn't to make abortion illegal, make birth control illegal, and then have kids raised in poverty. It's to raise the standard of living so people feel financially secure. That is the number one reason listed for women when they get they have their terminate their pregnancies, is that economically, it's just not feasible for them. They might have other kids already. A lot of women who get abortions already have kids, and they're trying to feed the kids they have and take care of the ones they do, and there isn't that kind of state support in terms of childcare and paid family leave and paid sick leave. And you're forcing women to choose between their kids. So with a better state system, with a better economic structure of redistributing the wealth, then yeah, you're going to get a healthier populace, you're going to get a less indebted populace, and you're going to get people having babies because they can afford it. It's not that hard, Alrighty, so globalization, a bit difficult. I think, again, free trade is another one on there in terms of principles versus practices. So with free trade, again, I don't, if the United States had suddenly a democratized workplace within the country, is it really in the interest of reforming capitalism to put up a bunch of barriers and tariffs and protectionist economic tactics in order to protect a national industry if people are thinking of themselves in terms of work. So I think you need free trade in order to have the leverage to encourage other countries to do these kinds of things. But this is getting on like beyond domestic policy. There's foreign relations and negotiations that kind of get out, I think, too far ahead of my personal opinion on how the economy should work. Austerity programs suck because all they do is punish the poorest people, and the richest people get away with it because they're the richest. They don't actually pay the price of austerity, even though oftentimes they are in the sectors that caused the need for austerity. And reductions in government spending in order to increase the role of the private sector in the economy. I also disagree with that. I think that, if anything, the role of charity that people want to hand off to religious institutions should actually be part of government spending. I don't understand why it is that people think that having charity in one area and different services is somehow solving the problems. Oscar Wilde, you cannot solve the problems created by capitalism with the profits of capitalism. You actually have to restructure the way that wealth is distributed. And when you have rich people who just give money to a church to feel better about themselves, and then that church gets to decide who gets the money and in what conditions and in what situations, that's not alleviating any of the problems. That's just, it's another form of compulsion in terms of people who have the money want to make you dance to their tune, and they can because they have the money. Whereas if that is given to the government, the idea, of course, is that you're thinking about what is fair for everybody. If some rich person fell on hard times, what kind of services should they have when they are poor, as opposed to, making it personal or based on religion? People have to go to a church or a temple or something. So the English speakers have used the term neoliberalism since the start of the 20th century, but with different meanings. It became more prevalent in its current meaning in the 1970s and 80s, used by scholars in a wide variety of social sciences, as well as by critics. The term is rarely used by proponents of free market policies. Some scholars have described the meaning as meaning different things to different people, as neoliberalism has mutated into geopolitically distinct hybrids as it traveled around the world. I think that's, we talked about the concept, how concepts travel, right? It's actually a term that you can look at for how social scientists look at the validity of a measure. And a valid measure, validity is an issue of, are you measuring the same thing again and again and again? If I do a medical trial with a certain number of milligrams of a drug, and I do it in France, and I do it in Kenya, and I do it in India, as long as I'm administering the same amount of drug in the same amount of time, that I can compare all those data. It doesn't matter the geography in that case, because it's about the sort of medical, the practice and the amount, and then making note of all the reactions or not reactions, as the case may be. Concepts, though, we have to measure them as social scientists to see how they travel. So it also gets, I think, very difficult when you've got some people who are more maybe moderate using the term neoliberalism to refer to a certain set of Republicans, whereas you've got people on the left who just refer to anybody who doesn't want democratic socialism as neoliberal. And it doesn't help at all. Anything here? Don't think so. This is all from the 90s, so I don't really see any information on how it's being used today. Oh, there's a church bell going off. I was wondering if you guys could pick it up if I was quiet, and so I went silent, and you can't. All right, let me go ahead and have a look at what's happening in the chat, because I want to then talk about allyship and the lack of allyship, but I see people have got a lot of things to say. So let's take a look at the chat below and see what you guys never thought of a maximum wage we're thinking about. I think is there any place that actually does have a maximum wage? Because you can't leave it up to the market to put a cap on these people's salaries, because they're the ones paying themselves. And I'm sorry, nobody's I don't care what you do in a 40-hour week or an 80-hour week. Nobody's work is worth like billions of dollars a year. It's just not. And then they get stock options and other stuff on top of it. It's just completely ridiculous. Wage. Maximum likelihood. Maximum wage. Here's one from 2018, 2014. Oh, that's interesting. Almost half of Germans want legal maximum wage. Let's take a look at that. Let's get out of the American bubble for just a little bit and think about, other than immediately moving to worker-owned cooperatives for everything, and let's have a look at what other people like. In Germany, they just started an experiment. It's going to run for 3 years with about 1,000 people, looking at universal basic income. There are places where these things are happening. These experiments are taking place, and they don't involve, people on Twitter being jerks or people on YouTube being jerks. Imagine that. Number of respondents in favor of Germany setting a maximum salary clearly outweighed those who were against it, with only over a quarter saying it was a bad idea. 29%, meanwhile, were undecided. The idea was particularly popular in former communist East Germany, where a majority of 58% said they wanted them to drive growth. The proposal was rejected by the Swiss. Wonder why. They're pretty rich. All right. Well, they also have, I think, a pretty good wealth redistribution system already, so I don't think it's quite as. And so we'll just go from there. All right. Yes. Maximum wage. Can't watch right now. Come back later. Not a Leo lib. Thank you. Remember when Ben and Jerry's had a rule about how much CEOs could be paid compared to the rest of the lowest employed worker? And here's the other thing too, is, having lived a little time in a management position versus a worker bee position. And I do both. When I need to do data entry and very basic work, I do that. When it comes to doing project management, I do that. And I can understand why people who have more responsibility can have a differential pay. I'm not interested in paying everybody the exact same for doing different kinds of work. I think it makes sense that you have people who have more accountability and more responsibility, and therefore they get paid a bit more. I'm not entirely opposed to the idea of there being some sort of staggered economic system. What I want to do is bring the top and the bottom so much closer. There's no reason in a country as America that people should live in that much poverty, especially when a lot of people's wealth is just bound up in their personal assets. And there's some, taxable ways and redistributive ways of making that happen. So I'm not, I don't even know how people could get the impression that I'm a neoliberal, on what positions, other than the fact that I don't refuse to deal with people because they're neoliberal, because I think fascism is more important and an immediate threat, whereas economics are a long-term prospect that we need to do gradually, test out, hone, tweak, improve over time. All right, what do we got there? And it's best understood with at least two distinct components similar to conservatism. There's an ideological component, then there's a rhetorical component. Conflating these will result in pain. Watching that video now, it's hilarious. Thanks for pointing it out. I don't know, I've missed the video. Sorry. Neolib got so overused, it's a meaningless combat term. Yeah, that's kind of where I am on it now. I don't even know. I would put myself as a social democrat. And I know June thinks she's a social democrat too, which is kind of weird, but she also thinks she's a social libertarian, which I don't know. Is she a libertarian on social issues, or is she a social libertarian? I don't, because a social democrat. But for me, I definitely believe in moving away from a free capitalist, sort of a free market structure and assumption that is the best way to go about things, to an increasingly mixed model, and definitely protect industries and protect services like education, prison, anything, roads from privatization, the post office. There are some basic utility services that should be provided for as just part of you living in a society, and not having to depend on other people providing it for you and the quality that they can. Now, there are people in the free market who will say, oh, well, then the government has a monopoly. But at least you can vote people out of office if you don't like the way they're running stuff. Whereas I can't do anything about Jeff Bezos and his employment policies other than like boycott his stuff. So you get way more accountability in a democratic system than under capitalism. Folks I know not rich who are religious feel as if they don't trust the government to do good things with their money, but they trust the church. Yeah, I think Po Mama, you're right that people want to control how their charity money is used. There's a gatekeeping kind of function there. Like, oh, I'll give money to help poor people, but only poor people who are deserving by a criteria I set. And the counter to that is, well, again, you can talk about people who are undocumented and permanent residents, but let's just for the moment leave it to citizens because other categories broaden things out. But in terms of citizens, as a citizen, you should be have access to the same kinds of society that you enjoy as everyone else. And you shouldn't have to depend on the charity of other citizens and their gatekeeping to have that quality of life. So I know I'm not arguing with you. I'm just kind of extending on your point that people who want the churches to do things want to use the church as the moral arbiter of their charitable giving, as opposed to the undeserving poor, whoever they may be. And that just shows their POSs, because oh, I'm only going to give to people who deserve it. Kelly says, I literally have no idea what it means. I need to, though. Destiny keeps calling himself one as a joke, and people keep calling him one unironically. Sibwolf says, the neo-lib shill stuff is so annoying. Agreed. Neo-lib has definitely become a general insult void of much meaning. True. I mean, I doubt anyone here is pro-Reagan or pro-Thatcher. Yes, precisely. Didn't Finland trial UBI and found it an overwhelming success and capitalist talking point? It'll make people not work was wrong. I don't know about the Finland experiment. I do know that my aunt reached out to me because she saw the story about UBI in Germany, and she's like, oh, you live there, you'll know about this. I'm like, I have to look it up just like you. But her impression, people were saying that everyone would get paid the same wage. There's so much misinformation out there about UBI. And I was like, no. It's just going to make sure that there's a base salary. So that means that, if you go on parental leave, you don't have to take unpaid leave. You've got some financial stability. If you want to start a business, you don't have to live off your savings. You actually have an income that will help you start it. And for people who make more, it won't make that much of a difference. Actually, I do think that if you had an UBI, that salaries would all just sort of readjust down. Government, or if you went to work for some sort of company or government, probably they go, okay, you got your base of UBI, and then we top you up an extra $20,000 a year or an extra $50,000 a year or whatever it is. I think that would eventually start to work its way into an assumption when people price out their salaries, because that's just rational. That's what it makes sense that businesses would all do, and governments too, because you're like, okay, well, you already have this much, so we're going to top up your UBI anyway. I think that I wouldn't expect, there might be some people who take a vacation for a little while because people in the States especially don't get proper vacations. And they might be like, okay, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to start a business, but first I'm going to take 3 months off. And I'm going to get myself sorted, and I'm just going to pay my bills, and I'm going to live very frugally, and then I'm going to start my business. I think UBI would help a lot of people break away from bad employment and give them the opportunity to, it actually might really promote capitalism because with a steady monthly income, you can take more risks. And if you add on top of that, having a secure health insurance access, right now, a lot of people in the States have felt trapped by their jobs because their jobs have really good health care benefits, and they don't necessarily want to risk going out and looking for another job and maybe having something else that's not as good, right? So they're kind of held hostage. That's one of the things that Obamacare was meant to solve, but it was watered down by Republicans because they're bad faith actors, and things about co-ops weren't properly implemented, and all kinds of things can be fixed about the ACA. Just don't get me started on that. But in terms of actually promoting entrepreneurship, if people feel that their healthcare costs are going to be covered and are reasonable, and they know they can account on $1,200 a month, which is not enough to really comfortably live on, but enough to at least give them 3 or 4 months of trying to make this business work and dedicate it to it for full time. I actually would imagine that they would start more businesses. It would actually probably help capitalism. I guess is my assumption, but it also would depend. I know here in Germany it's very difficult to. You can't own a bakery if you're not a master baker. So you have to be an apprentice baker and a journeyman baker, and then you have to take a test, and then you can have your own job. So I'm kind of comparing systems that are quite different from the German system, from the U.S. system. The U.S. system, you can just start a business as long as you comply with like the health stuff, right? But yes, so agreed with the gatekeeping aspects of charity. Thank you. For UBI work, measures would need to be put into place to prevent rents from rising so as to swallow the whole payments. Yeah, that's another whole aspect of UBI is whether or not the fundamental economy would shift as a result of people being assumed now to have a certain base income. So that's also a knock-on effect that I don't think you could get through experimentation. You'd have to have whole countries to do that. Flour is dangerous stuff. Are you talking about like the explodability of flour? We're talking about spontaneous fires there. Right. So getting onto this, it seems so. I've been thinking a lot about my problems with the far left. I guess that's the only way to say it, and that's because I've clashed a lot with people. And I was trying to assess what is it about our worldviews, because on policies, it depends. Like for people like Vosh, who've gotten in trouble time and time again for being insulting, for saying slurs, for using insulting in language and offending people, and not really taking identity politics issues as seriously. And having to do apologies. I mean, in my entire YouTube career, I've slipped once because of my default cis binary that I think about, that I associate with aggregate populations, and I became aware of that, and I'm trying to like get better and be not binary in my thinking. But Vosh and June, have really bad histories, and yet they're held up by this very small segment of mostly white, angry, young guys, and that's not going to be everybody in their audience, but predominantly it's the same angry white atheist dudes kind of that turned that followed S-lords, and when they were doing it with Christopher Hitchens, who's quite well educated, you thought that they had some class and taste. Or Richard Dawkins before he came out as being as bigoted as he was, and you thought, oh, these people are driven by intellect. Not really. not necessarily. There's a lot of arrogance and wanting to have an easy way of putting other people down without actually doing a lot of work, and just holding an opinion and deciding you're morally superior to somebody seems to be the thing that connects them. Destiny. I don't watch a lot of Destiny, and I don't consider Destiny far left. I think Destiny is more in the center on economics. I think he's probably, I don't actually know a lot about his economic views. My impression is he's got criticisms of capitalism, but he's more libertarian than democratic socialist. So if someone can help me out with that. And so I think when it comes, so we can talk about the difference between economics as a priority or ID poll as a priority, but I actually think that is not the core difference on reflection, even though it reflects the core difference. So I think before I've been thinking about it in terms of sort of class reductionists, people who are class reductionists, and by that, anyone who says, like, they don't even have to just do the stereotype or what's the word I'm looking for? Like the caricature of a class reductionist saying class is the only thing that matters. But if their assumption is, like, what brings people together is class, and then we can work on things from there, or somehow people's economic status is always the thing you have to consider first or foremost about their location in society. Or that somehow, like, all these issues, if you don't see, for me, if you don't see class as one dimension in the kaleidoscope of intersectional possibilities, if you see class in every dimension, and that's the only common thread you see in every dimension is the class element of it, you're a class reductionist, in my opinion. Social democrat and democratic socialist, I always get them, and I have to think about democratic socialism as being putting the emphasis first on the democracy, whereas the social democrats are putting the emphasis. So I'm not saying that, I mean, they both end up with democracy, but yes, it's democratic socialism versus social democracy. Where's it going with this? Yes. And then on the other side of the economics is the ID pole, and that's, people who are so focused on identity politics, I guess there's not really any caricature of this, who don't have a class critique. I don't know of a lot of people on the left who are advocates of massive reformations in social and thinking and our laws on issues of identity politics that don't also understand that there's a class component, but they don't start with the class component. And I think that really what it comes down to, it's not economics ID pole, it's in the system and out of the system. I actually think that there's an a priori difference of opinion here. And one of the things that I've noticed really that defines or divides the far left from, like, the progressives, I mean, there are probably some people who consider themselves progressives that are closer to, like, the far left Vosh side, Peter Coffin side, of YouTube. But I think what really comes down to is people who are in the system and people who hate the system. When I look at, like, the account for Black Women Views, or Women's Views, when I look at Chris Evans, when I look at some of the other people of color whose accounts I follow on Twitter, when I listen to more progressive Dems who are focused more on the identity politics side of things, the people who don't go on and on and on about the DNC as a conspiracy theory because they've worked in democratic politics and they know how useless and impotent the DNC is, if you've ever had to actually work with the DNC, then there are people who are basically willing to be part of the party and want to be part of the party, and in doing so they realize they have to make compromises with people they disagree with. You don't so this is the people who are like, I don't like a lot of what Joe Manchin, I don't like some of Joe Manchin's views, but I like Joe Manchin holding that seat. He might be a conservative jerk, but he's our jerk, and he will vote with us some of the time. And for the greater good, the larger picture, the greater goals of what the party wants to do, we understand that we have to be able to run people like Joe Manchin. And in order to be competitive in places that aren't California and New York, that, aren't Madison, Wisconsin, or Austin, Texas. We need to appeal to people who aren't just on the far, far left. And because of that, they are willing to make compromises. They are willing to get half of the loaf now. They are willing to get their foot in the door with ACA and then work on improvements. And the idea there is that using the party structure is part of the solution. And what I think I'm seeing anyway, from people like Peter Coffin, like Vosh, like Shoeonhead, is that they are outside the system. And when you're outside the system, it's very easy to be ideologically pure and hold yourself only accountable for your own views and then hold everybody to your standards. Because no one except the people who believe as you do are as good as you. If you reject the capitalism, you can reject the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. You don't buy into a system. You buy into an ideology. And this, I think, is a sense of moral superiority. That you're not a sellout. That you have these true beliefs. And as a consequence, you get a kind of a fake sense of your moral superiority. And this prevents you then from forming alliances where you could actually build a coalition. It is the knee-jerk reaction of when someone disagrees with you to just insult them and move along. Like, there's a difference if I'm dealing with somebody who I know is a Trump supporter and they're just going to bait me and try to be racist, I'm going to have one reaction to them. If someone is posting under a Lincoln Project ad, I voted Republican my whole life, but I can't handle this anymore, Trump has just gone beyond the pale, I'm going to be in there saying, thank you for your support, thank you for like breaking out. I'm going to modulate my reactions because I want to expand the coalition. I have a goal in mind that requires a structure. And the whole burn it down people, they want to burn it down before they have a replacement. Because what they envision is this purity, but in practice, they're going to have to make compromises too. And so I think that is actually really the fundamental core of the difference between people who tend to not overemphasize the economics and the people who do. And maybe there's a correlation there, that people who hate the system hate every part of the system. They hate the capitalist system, they hate the democratic system, and they hate whatever, and they just have this sort of ideological purity out here, and working within the system or compromising with the system taints you. Whereas from my perspective, coalition building is about addition. And that means sometimes you've got to make some pretty uncomfortable political bedfellows. I hate John Kasich. Hate him. I think he was terrible for Iowa. Ohio. Too many vowels for Ohio. He's a sexist, sort of like typical white male privilege dude. Did I want him speaking at the Democratic Convention? No. Do I understand it? Yes. I understand that Joe Biden needs to run a general election strategy, and that the time for talking about the core left issues was during the primary. And we had that discussion. We picked a candidate. And now the point is we move on from our left-wing bubble to a general election position. And there are still people who want to stay in the left-wing bubble. There are people who think that even though it's a general election now, they still have to be catered to, like it's a primary. And that frustrates me because I feel that as a team player, you get your shot to make your case in the primaries, and then you need to come together as a team. You need to come together and work for whoever the party picked and their vice president, because that's how you get change done. Those are the institutions we have. And that institution has been slow in producing change, but it has produced change. You have to, I look at the Black Congressional Caucus, or the Congressional Black Caucus, I think it's a CBC. And there is a representation there that didn't exist 40 years ago. Is it perfect? No. Could we use more? Absolutely. Because we needed a Congress that looks like America. But all of those changes have come through this sort of like making progress in small steps. And so throwing away the baby with the bathwater doesn't make sense to me. And this is why I think that the far left really does shoot itself in the foot with these purity tests and with these labels that they want to put on people. And yes, you can feel very righteous. Sorry. You can feel very righteous in your YouTube bubble. And you can have, you can get love from all of your fanboys in your comments. But it's the Lincoln Project who's putting ads up. It's the Lincoln Project who is actually working with moderate Democrats. And by alienating the people that actually you have more policy agreements with than the Lincoln Project, how are you going to, maybe you don't want to be part of the system. Maybe you just want to burn the system down. But in that case, you're going to remain a fringe group. And this is why I think that instead of actually doing the work, it's much easier for someone like June, or I don't know if Vosh blames the DNC, but I know that June is obsessed with the DNC, right? Instead of actually dealing with the people who voted for Biden, which is, he's got the support of black voters and a lot of white progressives. Not all of the far left progressives, but he won with white people, he won rural voters, he won in the suburbs, he won with black voters overwhelmingly, except for like in a fraction of the demo that did well with Sanders. instead of dealing with those people and their needs, they just try to treat like the DNC is the problem. And I don't even know, like, is the DNC in their head just like this sort of cabal of 15 or 20 people? And then what? All of the people who turned out in South Carolina, all of the black voters who turned out in every state in the Union, Mississippi, all the way up to Wisconsin, voting for Biden, like 2-1 over Sanders, are they just brainless morons? How do you build a coalition with people you don't respect? And this is what really annoys me, that the left keeps counting on, like, well, we'll have a look at it. But this person who, Dave Wiggins, I think it was just arguing again for like accelerationism. Oh, we all know that Biden will be better in the short term, but if Trump won a second term, it would bring about the revolution faster. And like, why is it that the world has to get completely like burned down crappy? And then you think, just like some spurned boyfriend or girlfriend or partner, oh, they're not going to realize that I was really the right one for them all along. Like, all voters are going to go, oh yeah, what we really need now is the Sanders revolution, or a far left revolution. Like, that is always tends to be. It's not like, hey, let's do the hard work. Let's go out there and actually build coalitions. Let's find allies who share like 80% or 70% of what we agree on and work with them. No, it's let's wait until the world gets so terrible that people don't have a choice but to come and ask us to run things, is kind of the impression I get. When? I just don't understand. Like where is that where has that been a successful strategy through a democratic process, not through a totalitarian takeover, but actually a whole bunch of voters just waking up and going, oh yeah, what I really want is this. All right, let me see. If someone goes on about how the DNC screwed Sanders, I stopped taking them seriously. No one had more money this time around than Bernie Sanders. No one had a better, basically, head start. He got close to half, right, of the votes last time. He had 4 years to solidify those relationships. He had 4 years to address the problems he had in the black community that was very clear in the 2016 race. He had 4 years to organize a get out the vote effort for young people who are going to be the backbone of his campaign but are the least likely to turn out. And he didn't. He just stayed in his little white progressive bubble and talked a good game and spent a lot of money on rallies and flying around and whatever else he's doing, but they didn't do the work. They never bragged about how many new people they got to vote. And when it came down to it, most places he was getting around 35-32% of the vote, which is generally worse than he'd done in every other state. So yeah, like, do the work, man. Obama knows how. Obama was doing the community organizing. He out-organized Hillary Clinton in that primary. So Brett says, I don't think you're a neoliberal. You're more like a big tent leftist willing to compromise with people you disagree with to keep the greater evil out. It's not just about keeping the greater evil out. It's about pushing it ever increasingly out the door. And greater evil too, I would say that there's it's not a greater, there's like a whole bunch of greater evils. Do I welcome, so for instance, when I see feminist framed critique coming out of the Lincoln Project, or when I see anti-racism content coming out of the Lincoln Project, even though I disagree with them probably 110% on their economic issues and on things like abortion? Absolutely, because a win on civil rights by moving that issue out of the partisan sphere and making it more acceptable on the right wing to be anti-racist and to be feminist is a good thing for everybody. So wanting to have societies in which people aren't targeted by toxic masculine values or patriarchal assumptions about competency is going to be good for everyone. And traditionally, the right has held on to those unjustified hierarchies. So if moving the Lincoln Project on social issues is, part of, they're not going to move that much on the economics, I'll take that win. I'll take that part now, and I'll keep pushing them on the other thing. So yeah, I'm definitely I'm definitely a half a loaf leftist. I will take a half a loaf today so that we can have 3/4 of the loaf tomorrow. Absolutely. So, all right, thanks for that, Brett. Let's see. People have no idea how bad things need to get for a revolution to happen. Yeah, much less the transition after. Think like we are living under a guy who is running basically an openly fascist White House, rife with nepotism, breaking the law on a regular basis in front of us with his Hatch Act violations, thinking he's above the law, destroying the post office, and we still can't get about 40% of the population to even give a crap enough to register to vote. Like, they are perfectly happy to like just walk away and be like, whatever. As long as my life is doing this thing, I don't have time for politics. I don't care about politics. My life isn't going to change that much. And, then the police are going to be the Stasi, American Stasi are going to be listening in on them, and it's going to be too late. So yeah, things have to get really, really bad before things like that happen. Yeah, and then that kind of instability. Hey, Lonely Wolf. Didn't he white-splain black nationalism to a black woman? Vosh? Yeah, we covered that on that was a very painful exchange Vosh was having on black nationalism. Yeah. And then, of course, he kind of like shifts for a bit, but then he'll seem to understand it, but then he has this sort of default that he kind of moves back to. So I don't watch enough of his content to keep track on what he's thinking because it's not that important to me, but it filters up through my Twitter in that way. It makes me too angry to watch. Don't tell me you love the working class and burn down a small business. Yeah. I think this is the other thing too, that when you look at certain civil rights leaders, like Al Sharpton was talking about the fact that you're not be angry at the right people. And he said, I know people are frustrated, and this is something that the civil rights movement has, there have been riots around the systemic and unrelenting oppression, and I understand why people lash out. I understand why people lash out in a moment, in passion, in rage, sort of crimes of passion, as it were. On the other hand, as a movement, I think the movement has to say, tactically, burning down businesses is not good for the movement, because ultimately it's not the businesses who are the police state. And two, the businesses you're burning down, yeah, Walmart can recover, but the mom and pop store can't. And so even though the expression is understandable, as a tactic, it doesn't make sense. Not in terms of public relations, and not in terms of solving the problem. So getting people to refocus and being angry at the problem is, I think, part of an ongoing back and forth, or what's the word, a sort of like interaction as these movements come up. You get the initial expression of fury, but then fury isn't a long-term plan. And to make change, you need the long-term plans. Yeah, so that's, I just want to, they're looking at public attitudes. It's interesting when the things were happening with George Floyd. Wisconsinites were like, yeah, we support BLM. And now that it's happening in Kenosha, the white people are reverting back to, oh no, protesters are, and this destruction is bad and looting is bad. So you can't really count on white people to hold a consistent view when it comes to their backyard. And that is part of I'm not saying that movements have to defer to the white racists, but in terms of winning public opinion, you have to, that is a consideration. How are you going to have your movement appear? And when BLM moved away from the violence and they moved toward peaceful protests, you saw an increase in public support. And the public support is fickle. People generally, and the media is to blame as well, for overemphasizing bits of destruction and playing it on a loop as opposed to playing peaceful protests. So I think there's a whole lot of things going on there that we can talk about. And the media definitely has an irresponsible role it has played in the past by going for sensationalism and misrepresenting mostly peaceful protests in favor of it bleeds, it leads. But My main fear is that Biden-Harris will suffer from voter suppression that will ramp up in September and October. So am I. That's why, for me, economics have to take a backseat to being anti-fascist. And I know that it is popular. It's basically there's a rationale going on, right? So if you are outside the system and you don't respect the system, you basically don't see the difference between Democrats and Republicans, because if it's not within your worldview, it doesn't count. But where was I going with this? No, I lost my train of thought. I think it had to do with. Now it's gone because I got distracted. I wanted to look at, okay, maybe it'll come back. But these are kind of old. All right, this is 2019. This isn't too bad. So this I'm sure that, okay, we're just going to switch gears. I went off. I'll go off on the people on the left again later, and I'll probably come back to it. Oh, I think it has to do with like being inside, being outside. So you basically like dismiss everybody who is in the system who doesn't agree with you, and you create divisions. It's kind of the same thing I've been saying the whole time. All right. Mr. Voidful says, Vosh has plenty of good and valid opinions. The issue with him is that he insists on being an a-hole. Also, he just dismisses anyone who criticizes him and just go get mad at them. Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I think that is generally the symptom of the left. And also, the thing is that they spend more time going after Democrats than Republicans. I feel that they just like, oh, of course Republicans are bad, but who we really need to tear down are the Democrats, who are trying to do it, but not the right way. And they're trying to help, but not in the right way. And, like, really? That's what your idea of allyship is to spend more time tearing down a non-existent DNC conspiracy and ignoring Black voters and all of the suburban people and the rural whites that voted for Biden, tearing and attacking those people. That's your solution. But anyway, let's look at American views of socialism and capitalism. These are based on positive or negative views. Responses offered by at least 2% are shown here. So, do you have a positive or negative view of socialism? Of the 55%, so more than half have a negative view. They think it undermines work ethic, increases reliance on government. It's been a historical and comparative failure. It's generally negative, and it undermines democracy. If people on the far left actually wanted to expand their coalitions, they could be working on taking on these issues. They could be working on rebranding themselves or presenting more palatable versions, policies, suggestions. But they don't. It's not just, it's easier to be against someone than it is to do the hard work of building coalitions and making compromises. Of the 42% who have a positive view of socialism, they think it creates a fairer, more generous system. It builds upon and improves capitalism. That's an interesting take on socialism. It's been historical and comparative success, and it's better than capitalism. They generally have positivity. Americans have a long way to go before you might get, you might get people under the age of 25 or 30 who, let's say, 70% of those people have a positive view towards socialism. They are the least likely people to vote. And unless you want to wait 40 years until they are in like their boomer years, their version of the boomer years, and can outvote, the people who finally died off. But if you want change now, you can't count on the least reliable voters and also the smallest proportion of the voting population. You need to be widely popular. You need to appeal to people who don't agree with you 100% of the time. Republicans, in particular, view socialism and capitalism as in zero-sum terms. That's very much as a result of the way that it was framed in America. And negative view, been tried for centuries. So, yeah, just generally, people on the far left are going to have a hard time just on policy issues, finding people who naturally agree with them. They need a branding like campaign. They need to point to specific policy solutions that have been implemented and focus on the positive and focus on areas of agreement and getting 10% of what they want. But so yeah, who is this? I think the guy was Dave Wiggins. I think the name was. Did this accelerant. David. Is it Wiggins like this? I didn't see. I think I replied to it. Let me see if I've got my replies up. I would post my tweet for context to that message. Let me see. So what are you guys saying? I've seen too many bad takes from Vosh to listen. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. Like I said, the number of times that he's been forgiven, or the way in which June's never really reconciled or admitted to her racist past or dealt with it, just kind of papers over it with her white privilege, and way too many white leftist dudes don't care enough about ID poll to actually pull her up on it. Like, oh, well, she agrees with us on economic populism, so, you know, wink and a nod at the Lauren Southern stuff and the racist stuff. And something beyond, oh, that was so cringe of me. You know you're getting the message across about police violence when even a Fox affiliate is shutting down our ass hats victim blaming in their comment section. Nice. Their toxic excuse, the toxicity being needed to attract people from the other side. Toxic masculinity. What did you say there? Yeah. Vosh and Zenderhall types, yeah, turns me off. I hear he's a P word because he won't debate me. D-waving. Isn't it toxic? There's so much toxic masculinity. There is a whole lot of alpha male preening going on in there. And that's the sort of moral, I think that just comes across as the moral superiority. Like, if you hang out with me and you agree with me, you might not have political power, but you're right. Also, people are just supposed to bow down to them because of their rightness. Like, oh, so clearly you're so morally superior to me, I have to put my art, I have to submit myself to your opinion. That's just not how politics works. You have to work with where people are and move them, or try to find areas of agreement, before you can persuade them. Like a little bird, and dudes like Vosh are like grandmas throwing out the breadcrumbs in validation. 42% isn't bad considering the history of the U.S. Yeah, I think that socialism, in terms of its reputation, has been basically like since the 90s. I would say people brought up in the 90s, and not in the 80s. Still, there was still a lot of Soviet Red Scare, but once the wall fell, it became less and less potent as a threat. And then you see China going to things like state capitalism, and communism doesn't quite have it's not the specter that it was back in the 60s. I can't imagine how F the world would be by the time I'm old, if I live that long, yes. Let's see. She still never apologized for the gorilla comments. Yeah, this is it. She's still like mocking feminists and feminism. She's still mostly focused on, criticizing the Democratic Party. But the thing is, because she'll criticize the Democratic Party, that's where, the purity thing comes in. I'd rather be pure and lord it over people and call them names than build coalitions and work with people I don't like and make me unhappy about it, but understanding that there is a reason why we need John Kasich at a Democratic convention, because we should have Democrats voting for us, and now we need independents, and now we need Republicans and he is the person who can talk to those people. They're not going to listen to AOC. The people who listen to John Kasich are not going to listen to AOC, and we don't need to give the AOC people cover to vote for the Democratic Party. We need John Kasich Republicans to give other Republicans cover for voting for the Democratic Party. I also heard people like complaining about Bill Clinton. He's like, how could, like, there's like, it just is a whole insider-outsider thing as well. You might not like Bill Clinton. He is a former president. He is a former Democratic president. He is going to speak at the Democratic National Convention. Yeah, and so insiders, outsiders. It's just, outsiders, I think, just really like their purity. And I think for myself, I like to win. I like to make progress. And so when it comes to weighing those things up, I'd rather have 80% or 20% of what I want now and have to compromise than to say burn it all down and have nothing all the time. Okay, thanks, gamer girl. I would unironically leave the left if it ableist or transphobic rhetoric became mainstream in socialist circles. Like holy F-osh still uses a variation of R slurs. Yeah. Mainly because it's a personal matter for me. How can you say you respect, like you're morally superior and you really want what's right for people if you can't treat just people with respect? And that includes like not using slurs. It's so easy to not use a slur. It's so easy to criticize people because of their views, to criticize people because of what they say or what the attitudes they hold, and as opposed to diminishing people because they belong to a group. It's like, I don't like ACAB. I don't. I'm all for smash racist police culture. No racist police. But as I said to Kevin, I don't like ACAB anymore. Like if Smash the Patriarchy was replaced with all men are evil or all men are bad. I don't think all men are bad. Like, are there some men who do bad things and some men who are maybe sociopathically bad? Yes, but I'm not going to just put all men into a category because of a culture that produced them, and it's the same thing. And you're not going to, how can you make the argument that you are of the morally superior worldview when you have such contempt for people? So, hi Priority 76. It's nearly impossible to show respect to today's fascists. Yeah, but also fascists are your political enemy. We're talking about just people on this side of the political spectrum. These are the people who generally, if you asked on a policy issue, they should have pretty much clear agreement. And I would hope on the issue of preserving democracy, they would have pretty much agreement. Like, the reason why I oppose fascism is not because of the economic structures that are upheld by fascism. I oppose fascism because it takes away your rights to participate in a democracy. It is an existential threat to everybody's rights. And it doesn't matter what the economy, once you lose that, the economy is whatever they want it to be. So if you don't start with being anti-fascist, I don't see how anything can precede anti-fascism. If the goal is democratic socialism, then you need the democracy part of it. And you're not going to have democracy under fascism. So, this came back to, this is what I remember now. So, my impression of people who hate the system and have an economic framework and be like, if long as people had wealth redistribution, that's the most important thing. I don't think it, like, relatively is. Yeah, so even though I hate the Democrats and I hate the capitalist system and I hate the system that produced Biden, which last time I checked was a primary based on votes, yeah, I'm going to say it's just harm reduction. Voting for Biden is harm reduction. Now, okay, if that's going to help you sleep at night and help you justify your Biden vote, great. Happy for you. But what that says to me is, like, I don't really care about democracy and anti-fascism. I'm mostly worried about, like, the economics, and democracy is optional to me. Now, maybe that's not the impression that they want to give. But when you tell me that anti-fascism work is harm reduction, no, for me, it is like, if you don't have anti-fascism, like, that is the first principles of this fight, is we can tolerate a lot within a democracy, but screw the fascists, because we're not going to be having this democracy otherwise. And then once we all agree the fascists have no place, now we can have a discussion. And so that is like, I'll take your Biden vote. Thank you very much. But I don't feel like you're a great ally if you're telling me that anti-fascism is mere harm reduction. I think it's existential, like, crises. I know folks who are ACAB tend to separate a person from the job. Someone might be great from the outside, but when acting as a cop, by definition, bad. Yeah, but this is like, I know someone who says ACAB who has someone in their family who's a cop. And I guarantee you that they don't say that to their face. They'll go on like ACAB on Twitter, but when they actually see their cousin, you think that they like confront them? Absolutely not. It's a complete hypocrite. So the thing about ACAB is that it doesn't have any subtleties. This is why I prefer something like smash racist cop culture, or even smash cop culture. I mean, we have to replace, just like smash the patriarchy. You have to replace the patriarchy. You can't redeem it. And I think we have to smash cop culture, and we have to start from first, like, try an entirely new assumption about the relationship between the populace and the police. And I know cops are capable of diffusing situations. I know that police are capable of not shooting people because I see them do it with white people on video all the time. All I want is for the police to treat everyone like they were a middle-aged white guy driving a Mercedes. That's it. I just want them to extend that same courtesy and deference and patience and de-escalation priorities to everybody. Just treat us all like we're privileged white guys. Like, so I think they're capable of doing it. We've seen it. It's not impossible to attain that. Right now, they're just selective about who they practice that kind of policing to, and that is the racist cop culture that needs to be smashed. Yeah, it's okay, Pope Mama. I know you're giving an explanation, and you know, like I said, like people I know, like I've seen them go ACAB. I'm like, I know your family, bitch. Like I met the cop in your family. And now you're going to be out here telling them that did you tell them to their face they're bad or a bastard? I don't think so. You can't convince the average person that cops are redundant, but make their small businesses and homes feel unsafe. Yeah, I would agree. I think the other thing about ACAB is that it makes people want public safety. They want someone to investigate the murders. They want someone to come and, you know, investigate. So by attacking the police, people can't distinguish between the ACAB bad tactics of some cops and generically the provision of public safety. In people's minds, the cops are public safety. Because again, like I just think there's a lot of messaging problems with the left, on the far left, in that they speak within a bubble. They speak in a code that they understand, but from the outside, it's confusing. And then I saw Sophane saying, oh yeah, when I say defund the police and people challenge me and I have to explain that I don't mean defund the police, it starts a conversation. You don't want to start a conversation saying, I don't actually mean what I'm saying, or what I'm saying doesn't mean what you think it does. Then that just makes you, so yeah, and also it just seems to focus on the cops as opposed to the system, you know? And, you know, defunding the police, again, if we talked about reprioritizing or smart, you know, providing social service calls as opposed to always armed response units, that's, you can call that defunding. It's really restructuring. It's really restructuring the funding. So, yeah, it's a legitimate outpouring of frustration, but it's not a position. Exactly. And oh my gosh, do we need to purge? I mean, there needs to be a proper purge of white supremacists from the military and from the policing organizations. And I know that my dad had mentioned this to me before, and I've seen it reinforced in the media. He's friends with people who are retired police, and he said that, you know, with his one friend especially, it's always the us versus them mentality. That's a cultural thing. The idea that the people that you're policing are the enemy is a mindset that is given in training, and that is optional. It doesn't have to be that way. And so, yeah, when you see cops behaving badly, it's easy to go ACAB. But when you want to think about the solution, yeah, just demonizing people isn't a solution. Exactly. Restructure the police is not as catchy. Yeah, I know. I mean, that's the one thing that Republicans do really well. They manage to, you know, Frank Luntz has really got famous for this, is talking to people in focus groups and waiting for one person who was just getting paid maybe, you know, $30 or $50 an hour to say something that would give him a catchphrase. It would sum up something that they couldn't come up with blue sky marketing, but it comes out of, the mouth of babes, as it were, and plucking that out and making it the core, just succinctly getting to the heart of the issue. And people on the left were just terrible at that. We're absolutely, because we think too much about things. Meaningful reform is possible until the U.S. dismantles and rebuilds its police system. I think the problem with that is, you're never going to get to a position where we're going to have simultaneous dismantling of a police system. It's going to happen piecemeal. It's going to happen in this community and that community, and there's going to be more community involvement. But for you to have a dismantling of a system, that for me, you're saying some sort of like federal dismantling and a restructuring. And there have been times where we learned this during the Minneapolis thing, that police departments had a crisis, and so they basically like deputized a bunch of sheriffs to be police, and then they had a transition period. You're never going to dismantle it. You're going to have to reform it. You can't like have a gap, and you need to figure out what reforms work and what don't, and what communities need. Various communities are going to have different needs. So I think that, I understand the aspiration there, but I don't think dismantling it and rebuilding it is the framework. I think we're looking at an ongoing progressive reform based on common principles and guided by and supported by laws that have repercussions, like building the resources for a database for bad cops so that they don't get rehired again, putting investments in those kinds of things to protect public safety. But that doesn't tie on to dismantling. Again, this is where it comes into like where I'm more of a reformist than a revolutionary. I don't think that, I tend to think you have to think about working within the institutions. You can't, so not taking them down and rebuilding them from scratch. I think you need to like clear out all the furniture and clear out and basically gut it, but there's the foundation is there. It's going to stay. And so the question is, how do you build it on top? Knew a guy from D&D group a few years back who's an ex-cop, told a story of first day of the Met. His police chief gave him the talk that could the police shooting of unarmed black men be tackled with a sort of South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission? All right, the United States, the problem with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission isn't so much with when it comes to, I think, black people and their oppression. It comes with white people who refuse to accept responsibility. I think that's the main failing. And it's, I think what it is that with the civil rights movement, with integration, with the expanded diversity in entertainment and in sports, I think the average distance between a white person and a black person in their social context or knowing people individually, I think white people some people still live in a white bubble, but I think there are fewer people who live in a white bubble, and so they are more likely to actually see the humanity, the fundamental humanity of black people and black Americans. The reason I think gay rights moved so much faster into an equality situation is because there are gay people in every community. And it's that the reduction of the othering. It's when it's somebody I know and I can relate to, that is when people tend to get more invested. So while I think that there are some woke white people who would understand the role of that, I don't know that, I'm not saying it would be a bad thing to do, I just don't know that if it would solve a lot, because there's a lot of denial in the white community, which is upheld by white supremacy and reinforced by it, that this is not, it's simultaneously the job of white people to make excuses for slaveholders and excuses for the founders' slavery and how that was a different time, but at the same time, not take accountability for the effects that it's still having today. So I don't know if it would be, there's been a lot of centuries of denial in the white community that is really built into the myth of the country and the way that white culture defines itself, that is challenged by a relatively small proportion of white people. So this is, they gave him the talk that this is the modern police force. We don't tolerate racism, but between you and me, they're all bastards. That's the reason he is an ex-cop. Yeah. And that's the culture that has to change. Absolutely. It's the us versus them mentality. And it predominantly affects people of color, but there are also certain kinds of white people who fall foul of that privilege that also get treated poorly, probably not as poorly. So, yeah, you have no problem, Roar Cats. So I am a gradualist. I am a progressive. I don't believe in revolution. I think it's better to make reforms and adjust along the way than it is to try to replace a whole system. That being said, if everybody in the job is a problem and has violence on their records, I think the way to replace that is to like fire all of them and bring in people who are fresh out of training, who have been who have a new set of values. So this is the thing that I think is important. How do we end up having the same bad kinds of policing practices generation after generation after generation? And maybe you can think about this in your own life. The sociological and the psychological effects of being part of an institution are really important. We tend to think about people as individuals. Americans especially tend to think in terms of like a radical individualism. But when I started working at the state capitol, we had basically like rules that you couldn't do campaign work on state time. And I didn't do campaign work on state time, I can say. But in terms of expecting us to go and spend our lunch hour stuffing envelopes to send out a mailer, that was expected as like part of your work. Like if you were going to be on staff, you were going to give up your lunch hours and you're going to go down to the Democratic Assembly, whatever thing. And for your lunch hour, you're going to spend it with other people doing this mailer because it needs to get out. Or you're going to spend your evenings donating your time for free doing calls. Or you're going to take your paid vacation time and you're going to go campaign for your boss, or you're going to go campaign for somebody else. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough that you worked there, if you see what I mean. There was an expectation, a culture, and everyone participated in it. And if you didn't participate in it, you got a bad reputation. You might not get hired again. Does that mean that you're not getting hired for not doing campaign work on state time? No, but you're not willing to work for free. Right? You're not willing to give everything, your lunch hours, your evenings, and your vacation time to make sure that everybody wins. So make sure our side wins. To do that is to be a good player. And so I did. Like that was the expectation, right? My boss expected it of me. My senator expected it of me. People who ran the DNC, the stuff expected this sort of thing. And so it shaped my behavior. And I went along with it. Because to stand against an already existing institution is to risk your job. And so when you have young police officers coming in, they can have the best intentions, but if they are met with that terrible culture, then at some point they're either going to have to stand up to it or they're going to be broken by it. And unless we really stop demonizing cops individually and realize the way that police departments are an institutional machine that has been cranking out white supremacy, we have to change the machinery. It doesn't matter what people you put in it. And that change can't come from not having a police and then starting over. We have to change the culture through public accountability, through transparency. And yeah, I think if a cop is involved with a shooting, I think they need to be arrested. I don't think this administrative leave crap cuts it anymore. That you need to basically be arrested like a regular citizen if you're involved in a shooting. Because you can't have a license to murder. And if there were justifiable reasons, if it was self-defense, that will get processed. But you can't shoot someone 7 times in the back and then go on paid leave. Sorry. Yeah. And no guillotining people who have something you want. Oh yeah, the whole guillotining, the whole guillotine. Again, just self-owning. It's so in the bubble. Oh, look at us, we're gonna guillotine Jeff Bezos. This doesn't. His family would just inherit. Like, guillotining one man is just going to put his wealth into the next generation. Like, ah! Yeah, bloodless and democratizing. Yeah, they had the Glorious Revolution in the UK, right? They just invited over some royals. Right, so this is a kind of pointless picking fights. So this Dave Wiggins guy was like the one who was doing the accelerationism. Oh, that's right. I was going to try to look for my reply, but my reply is going to be like days ago. And so Charlotte Clymer, who is with the Human Rights HRC, isn't it? Human Rights Campaign? Yes, she works. She's an alum of the HRC anyway. She wrote, I don't know who needs to hear this, but there is no scenario in which Trump being elected is, quote, for the best, unquote, despite your obsession with this toxically privileged burn it all down mindset. This isn't a game. People will suffer and die if Trump is reelected. Grow up. All right, so she is subtweeting a specific person on Twitter who, I guess I keep bringing it up now, so I feel like I have an obligation to try to, wait, let me go open a second window. And then I'm going to get going. I have so much on today. I've got this. I've got a patron hangout. I've got a session 0 on my gaming channel to do. And I DM'd yesterday and I took part in it. And then I've got so much going on. All right. Let me see if I can get to... go to my account. No, you won't go to my account. I hate you. Is this my account? What is this? Oh, okay. Oh, great. Yeah. This random thing that looks like a person is the person. Okay. Tweets and replies. See if I can find it. Was just the other day, so it shouldn't be. Oh yeah, Eva has the cutest little baby squirrel that she's taking care of. Or they, I don't know what the pronouns are, so. And they had a little play boxing match. Sorry, that is just too adorable for words. It is too sweet. Ah, here it is. Oh, Weagle, right. Okay, right. So, I think I said Wiggin, but it was wrong. It's this guy. I'm glad. See it? This is why I check these things. All right. So, because people love arguing on here and it's a rainy Saturday, how would a Sanders ticket be absorbing the current Trump message? Asking because Sanders built his campaign around social movements. Oh, wait, that's not the one. This is the same guy, but he wrote about accelerationism. So let me find it. I might have to go to his account. Oh, right. Okay. There's this one. Oh, man. Yep, here we go. I think this is it. I had to go down the rabbit hole. There's a fantasy out there that if liberals would suddenly realize centrists don't win if Biden's lost, but that's silly. They'll point to polls and 2018 results and say they were winning until the looters and riot. Oh, I can't find the right one. I can't find the right one. I have too many things that I have replied to on Twitter. But anyway, the whole point of it was the accelerationist argument. That it's actually better in the long term if Trump were to win because it would bring about the revolution more quickly. And I'm sorry I didn't pull that up, but okay. We're going to go back. So that was what this tweet, that's what the whole point of it is. It was the whole accelerationist argument. Basically saying when it comes to Trump, that it's not a game, that if we get Trump reelected, people are going to die. And we're going to lose our freedoms. And then freaking Brianna Joy Gray decides to, like, purity police or virtue police a discussion about long term, like what's going to happen in the future. Is Biden better for the revolution, or is a second Trump accelerationist, path better? And Brianna Joy's got to come out here saying someone should tell Charlotte people have long been dying. She might have missed it while at brunch. And then she gets down here. The argument isn't to burn it all down. It's to ask Biden to be accountable to the people whose backs he hopes to ride to victory. Like, he already won the primary. He is responding to people in the black community. Like, if you look at the his pick, and when he had a whole world of qualified women to find, he found like an absolutely excellent woman of color who connects with and represents the kind of women who are out there supporting him. So he is listening to her on issues of racism, and she has been talking about police reform in years before people were talking about ACAB right now. So we could condition our votes on Biden giving the peace sign next week, and they would say that we're asking too much. Like, just be anti-fascist. You don't have to be pro-Biden. Just be anti-fascist. And it's like, it feels like anti-fascism is an imposition. Being anti-fascism is putting your nose out of joint. It's not something you feel moved to do because you despise and fear fascism. Like, you can't both be like super anti-fascist and then say, oh, and Biden has to earn my vote. Because you're not voting about Biden. You're not voting on Biden. You're voting to stop fascism, first and foremost. And that's why I'm like, ugh. And honestly, it's not the biggest thing in the world. I will give out my opinion. But I'm still gonna say thank you. I mean, I said thanks to Shoe on Head when she came out and said she was riding with Biden. Like, glad to see it. I'm glad to see that, because ultimately we need to unite around anti-fascism. And if that is the Lincoln Project moving people to anti-fascism, or if it's Shoe on Head finally getting over her Bernie thing and saying, I'm gonna vote for Biden, that is all good, because it's all anti-fascism, end of the day. Thanks for doing this, Christy. I don't know what I'm doing other than like getting on and nattering for a select few intelligent, a very refined crowd of people. My followers. I hear talk about making it easier to have weed from the DNC. Yeah, I think that Biden is of course a little bit a product of his own time, but the way things are going, yeah, we need to reform legalization laws about marijuana across the country so that they can actually do banking. Right now, the biggest obstacle to a lot of small businesses, and even though, and the thing is that it's mostly white people who own these weed production businesses. Gee, I wonder, is there a racial component there? Absolutely. So, getting more people of color involved in this business, it would actually, there's an opportunity there to have better representation and not just be another restructuring of existing wealth disparities. The white people start the businesses and the black people get picked up for the crimes in other states. Anyway, banks can't handle money to do with drugs. And so you get a lot of these businesses that are dealing only in cash, which makes them quite vulnerable to robbers because they know they have to have a lot of cash on hand because they can't put it in the banks. So simple things like that would be an economic stimulus. And against the far left, it would also be a way to redistribute wealth by adding more people who are invested and have capital to invest in a business in order to be, self-sustaining and start hiring workers and expand the economy. So, all right, I think that's going to be it. I think I'm out of things to say. I mostly just wanted to look at the concept of neoliberal and say this is silly to call progressives or other people who identify as social democrats or black voters, because they disagree with you, to just label them as neoliberals and not listen. And then the other big thing too is just substituting your criticisms of the primary process. Instead of saying, being honest and say you disagree with the vast majority of voters and talk about what black voters were voting on versus what you wanted them to vote on, they just blame it on the DNC. And again, that's never going to solve the problem. Like, the DNC doesn't have that kind of power. It has some money it can give out. It puts on a convention. It has some people who run it. But ultimately, the campaigns control their fundraising, their messaging, their networking, their grassroots hiring. Campaigns are not that influenced by the DNC. And for me, people who blame the DNC for their side losing basically don't want to interact with identity politics and don't want to listen to black people. Because the heart and soul of the Democratic Party is not white liberals. The heart and soul of the Democratic Party, white people are the base of the Republican Party. And white liberals, like, we're guests in the House of a party that actually is more about representing people of color these days. And giving and putting those issues front and center, because they vote. White people like us, we got to compete. And so we need to think about what the majority of the party wants. And that fringe Bernie element just wants to come in and smash everybody else on the head with their purity. At least that's my impression. All right. I said I was going to go, and then I kept talking. All right. So there's, until next time, gosh, there's just so much that's going to be on my channel. So if you like the gaming stuff, you have to go over to my gaming channel now. There's 2 more episodes up. And that's going to continue, I think, moving 1 to Sunday. So on the gaming channel, it's going to be Christiosity Saturday. I'm running Dragon Heist, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, starting with a session 0 later today. And then until we wrap up the story, there's also the Tuesday night Underworld series that we're running with R&D. So plenty of, if you want to listen to some D&D and fall asleep, that's a great channel to go and do it at. Otherwise, another happy hour here, I'm sure that sometime this week. My patron hangout will be in several hours from now. It will only be 50 minutes though, because I got to get over to my session 0. And until next Sunday, guys, I've been Christy. You've been awesome. Thank you for stopping by, and be well, be safe, wash your hands, and don't touch your face. All right, catch you guys later. Bye-bye.